Hello everyone, this is Tyler. Welcome to section 1 of the course, the strategy that minted billionaires. Now before each section, we're going to go over the topics we're covering in the section and also the purpose, why you should care about the section. I always like knowing why I should care about something before I go and learn it. So anyway, topics covered for this section are Jesse Livermore, George Soros, Paul Tudor Jones, Ray Dalio. These are all billionaire investors that have made ridiculous amount of money in the markets by applying global macro technique. And so the purpose of this section is to open you guys to the possibilities of global macro investing and review the success of other people who have embraced the style and used it to extract so much money out of the market. Additionally, we want to help students think outside the box of Buffett style conventional investing or passive index investing or set it and forget it type of investing, because that's just not the only thing out there, even though that's the only thing that's preached these days anymore. And also to give you guys some inspiration and motivation to get to the course and to try to master the material, or at least start down this path knowing that there's fruits and spoils to be had at the end. So, and another thing I don't have in this slide here is you don't need to take my word for it. I want to show you guys that global macro can work. Okay, you don't need to believe me. I'm going to show you here. Lecture 1 is Jesse Livermore, who we call the father of macro. Now, who was Jesse? That was this guy over here on the right. Let me pull out my little pen here. That's Jesse Livermore. Blonde hair, pretty good looking guy. Has a nice little stogie here. Probably came off a good day in the market. He was the original macro trader who amassed a fortune in the early 1900s. And this was the book that was written about him, called Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. It's extremely famous. Anyone who's been in the business as a trader, investor knows that this book has just timeless advice in it, timeless wisdom. It's often rated as, the best investing and trading book of all time. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't read it or you haven't heard about it. There's some great info in there, and I have some quotes out of this book later in the lecture here. So how did this guy get his start? Well, at 15 years old, he went into the market, kind of tepid attitude. He said, I'm going to try something. And he ended up doing pretty well. He had a first profit of $3.12 for, at his age, back in that day, was pretty good. And he went on to become a millionaire before he was 30 years old. So this guy obviously had talent. He called the 1907 crash and made $3 million in a single day. And he also had to have this guy beg him to stop shorting stocks on that day. And, JP Morgan, I'm sure you guys have heard the bank that's still going today, JP Morgan Chase, those brokers were on the brink of bankruptcy, and Livermore basically had the market in his control, in his hand, and James Pierre Morgan had to go over there and beg Livermore to stop shorting. He also called the Great Crash of 1929, where he made over $100 million. It's the most famous, most documented story of a speculator that really made out well after the Great Depression. Most people did the opposite. They lost everything. And he's a billionaire trader because back in those days, $100 million is around $1 billion or more today, depending on how you account for inflation. And here's a cool little graph of what that crash looked like back in the day. I love going back to these old historical graphs. This is the Dow Industrials. You can see we were nicely uptrending, and then we had a parabolic move up that everyone brought into. And finally, Livermore saw the conditions turning, the tide turning, and he shorted all the way down and made that huge, huge profit. You can see the total fall is around 89.54%. Imagine being caught on the other side of that. And that's what kicked off the United States Great Depression. But Livermore actually used that drop to his favor and came out a very, very wealthy man. Now, how does this tie back to macro? Well, his wild success, all these great calls and these great profits, did not come until he studied and learned what he called general conditions in his book, and that is akin to global macro. Macro was his ticket to legendary status. And here's a few quotes to explain how he looked at things and why he thought macro was so important. This is about all I have learned, to study general conditions, to take a position and stick to it. So he's saying through his whole career, the most important thing was looking at the general conditions and the general tide. Here's the next quote. Nobody can catch all the fluctuations. In a bull market, your game is to buy and hold until you believe that the bull market is near its end. To do this, you must study general conditions and not tips or special factors affecting individual stocks. So he used to pay attention to individual stocks and watch them go up and down and scalp them, but he realized the big money was not really looking at the individual company's story, but rather the big picture. Where's the macro going? Follow the macro. And once he made this realization, he was able to get out of the bucket shops, which is where he started, which is they're now illegal, but basically they were a place where you go and bet against the house on stock prices. You never own stock, you never owned a piece of a company, you just bet on the prices. Is basically gambling. And he actually found a way to beat that system, but in order to get to the next level and move on to Wall Street and where he made his real money, he had to embrace macro. He understood that the macro conditions were the key to the big trends and ultimately the outsized profits that he earned. And I'm going to finish this section with a quote, once again illustrating how important Jesse Livermore realized general conditions were. And I quote, "I still had much to learn, but I knew what to do. No more floundering, no more half-right methods. Tape reading was an important part of the game. So was beginning at the right time. So was sticking to your position. But my greatest discovery was that a man must study general conditions to size them so as to be able to anticipate probabilities." So let me emphasize, my greatest discovery was that a man must study general conditions. So here's an entire book where he talks about his trading career, and it all boils down to him understanding the macro. And when he understood the macro, he can understand where the big trends were to happen, and he could hop on and ride them to huge profits.